Hi guys, it's Corey Matthews back again. This time around, we're going to talk about intermittent fasting. So, I know this is a hot topic and a lot of people are talking about intermittent fasting. We have a lot of information on our blog. But one thing that I really wanted to share about intermittent fasting is I wanted to just share some of the things that people are hearing and thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to do intermittent fasting. It's great for me. There are a couple different populations that I say that intermittent fasting is not the best for you if you have a couple conditions. So, intermittent fasting, if you are dealing with hormone imbalance, so if you are finding that your hormones are driving you crazy and you're having issues with the hormones, that might not be the best time to try intermittent fasting. Here's why. Listen to me before I tell you why, and then I'll also tell you where it actually falls into place where it works for people. But intermittent fasting, I have found, is not necessarily beneficial for those women that are going through postpartum. So, postpartum, some in pregnancy as well, but postpartum with intermittent fasting, those hormones are still all over the place, and it's kind of really, it can mess with those hormones. And for a lot of women postpartum, they are suffering with issues with their thyroid after giving birth. Now, we're going to go quite a few years and talk about perimenopause. Perimenopause is also another time that I don't necessarily recommend intermittent fasting. So let me talk about these two. I know perimenopause and postpartum, you're like, how do those go together? But they actually really do go together because after having a baby or as you're going through perimenopause, you have episodes where you can be estrogen dominant. Now, what goes along with estrogen dominance, and this is where your estrogen is really high and your progesterone is low or basically non existent. So again, as women start to go through perimenopause, this is what happens. Estrogen goes up. You start to experience all the things from estrogen dominance of, the sore boobs, the crazy periods, I'm trying to think of all of them, right now as I'm thinking about this, but you start to see a lot of things with the estrogen going high. Hot flashes is one of them. Same thing that happens postpartum after you've had a baby. You can have all these same symptoms. In addition to these, if you think about both of these times of your life, you're going to find a lot of stress. So having a new baby is stressful. All these changes in your life are very, very stressful. And you're going like, oh my gosh, I can't understand what's going on. What this leads to is your cortisol levels can be elevated. Why I say this about intermittent fasting. For some women, intermittent fasting actually puts a lot of stress on the body and it causes their cortisol levels to go up. So I want you to think of this isn't just necessarily I'm going to do intermittent fasting and I'm going to lose weight. There's lots of science that goes into it and lots of research behind intermittent fasting. If you read Stacia's story, you will find that intermittent fasting for her, when she hit menopause, was amazing. For women in menopause, intermittent fasting is amazing. And it has a lot to do with the fact that your estrogen and progesterone aren't doing this. You don't have progesterone down here, you don't have estrogen all the way up here. So you have less crazy fluctuations in your cortisol. Where you have a lot of cortisol fluctuations is postpartum and perimenopause. So intermittent fasting may not necessarily work for you. Same thing goes for your thyroid. Again, perimenopause, postpartum, you can have issues where your thyroid is a little sluggish. And that can be because of the estrogen progesterone imbalance. It can be because they're not in optimal levels. And so we see necessarily their thyroid goes down. How many women have you ever met that postpartum, they're like, oh my gosh, my thyroid must be off? Yes, there's a lot of studies that show that women right after birth, their hormone thyroid levels will actually go down. And so those come back up later on. Same thing with perimenopause. A lot of women can suffer from that with the changes in their sex hormones. So they start to see their thyroid go. Too many times in intermittent fasting, what we find that women do is they undereat. So if you're not eating enough, you're already jacking up your metabolism hormones. We'll go into another episode of why, if you're under eating, that's just really messing with your metabolism. But key is with intermittent fasting, too many people are under eating. Second thing is there's a lot of news about with intermittent fasting, you put keto with it. Keto, again, by itself, yes, there's great studies for it, lots of research that shows why it's so beneficial. But for most women that are going through postpartum or perimenopause, keto and the excess fat and doing too much fat can negatively impact your thyroid. So there's just too many factors that fall into place with intermittent fasting, some of the diet trends that go with it, and women in those areas. So I like to share for women that are going through postpartum and perimenopause is that we really want to focus on a nutritional plan that is beneficial for your body. So you can do timed nutrition. You could do circadian fasting. So the difference between both of those and intermittent fasting is usually, you eat for 8 hours, you take 16 hours off. Some people go even bigger where they will do 4 and 20. So 4 means you're eating for 4, 20 means you're fasting for 20. So when we talk about time nutrition would be, say, I'm going to get up in the morning and I ate dinner last night at 7, so I'm not going to eat until 7 o'clock in the morning. There's so many studies that show the benefits of fasting. And yes, when you go to sleep at night, you are fasting. Breakfast is breaking that fast. But what I want you to be aware of is not doing it super extreme. So, perimenopause, postpartum, what it would look like is getting up and having that breakfast 12 hours after you had your last meal, and then focusing on something that is going to have good fiber, good protein, vegetables, not necessarily loaded with carbs. You don't need all those extra carbs. So this is where things will be a little bit different, but actually having some breakfast, getting some breakfast in, then at lunch, having lots of vegetables, good protein. And then, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but for my postpartum and perimenopausal, what I like to see is you have some carbohydrates at dinner, because usually in both of the perimenopause and postpartum, what I'm finding is that you're having a really hard time sleeping. There's so many factors, and night sweats, crying babies, just a lot going on with sleeping. Having some carbohydrates before you go to bed, 30 grams of complex carbohydrates, will actually help you sleep better. Again, probably not something that they're recommending in intermittent fasting, but this is a little bit different. So I wanted to share some insights on intermittent fasting and why I'm a little hesitant when I hear women talk about intermittent fasting. So this is my takeaway for you. If you are finding that you are struggling with intermittent fasting and you're like, oh, it worked for Jane and Susie and all my friends, but it just won't work for me, there's probably some other issues going on, and that's why the intermittent fasting is not necessarily working for you. So go back to a more traditional plan of eating. Eat when the sun is out. Focus on, listen to this carefully, protein, fiber, greens, and fats. So not a lot of carbohydrates, but focus on those, and that's going to help you balance your hormones to help you lose weight. So again, we're focusing on still eating really healthy. We're still focusing on good nutrition, but cutting out a huge window of time of not eating might not necessarily be the best thing for you postpartum, perimenopausal, because you can be having issues with your thyroid and your cortisol, which can be made worse with intermittent fasting. If you have questions, because I know I gave you a lot of information, go ahead and put them in the comments and I will send some information back your way. Again, like, subscribe so you get all these as we go forward. Thanks, guys.